Have you ever woken up one day and realized your whole life looks perfect, but somehow doesn't feel like it's yours anymore? I used to think comfort meant happiness. Big house, nice car, fridge full of groceries, a husband who handled the bills, and yet, some days, I'd catch myself staring out the kitchen window wondering where I went. If this kind of quiet ever hits you out of nowhere, tell me I'm not alone. Drop a comment. I really want to know if I'm the only one who ever felt this way. My name's Adeline Hodges. I'm 61. I've been married to Brian Holt for 37 years. And until recently, I would have told you we were doing just fine. Maybe not exciting, maybe not passionate, but fine. We live in a lovely home just outside the city. Wraparound porch. Garden in the back. 3 spare bedrooms that haven't seen guests in years. Brian retired 5 years ago, but he still works, just not for money. Now he manages investments, golf tournaments, and high-end friendships with men named Martin, Brody, and Kevin, who all laugh too loud at things that aren't really funny. We don't fight. Not really. We just sort of pass each other. He reads the paper. I water the orchids. We ask about the grandkids, mention what's for dinner, and move on. Some days, the quiet is peaceful. Other days, it feels like walking through a museum of someone else's life. We hired Alonzo Pineda after Brian had back surgery. Brian said he needed someone just in case. But after the stitches healed and the physical therapy ended, Alonzo stayed. He's quiet. Mid-40s, maybe. Always early. Always polished. There's this calm energy about him. Like no matter what kind of day you're having, he's already made peace with it. He opens the car door like it's an art form. Says good morning like he actually means it. Doesn't pry, doesn't talk too much. Just drive. That's it. And for the first 6 months, I barely noticed him. But then came that day. It was one of those mornings where nothing really goes wrong, but everything still feels off. You know the kind. You burn your toast. Your blouse doesn't sit right. The coffee tastes a little bitter even though it's the same brew you always make. I had a lunch meeting with Nola Mora, and Alonzo was waiting out front like always. Black slacks, charcoal coat, hands folded in front of him like a gentleman out of another time. I remember thinking he looked like something from a movie. He opened the door and smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Hodges. I smiled back, but something in me twitched. Adeline, I said. Call me Adeline, please. Mrs. Hodges makes me feel like my mother. He let out this soft chuckle and nodded. All right, Adeline. It was such a small thing. Barely even a moment. But it stuck with me. Like when a breeze sneaks through a window you didn't know was cracked open. That afternoon, as we pulled into the driveway, he said something I'll never forget. You've got a good laugh. You should let it out more often. He said it so gently. Like it was just an observation. Not a compliment. Not a flirt. Just truth. And I didn't say a word. I just sat there while my heart did this weird little flutter. I didn't know it then. But that was the beginning of everything. If you've ever had someone say something small that stuck with you for days, share it in the comments. Those little moments? They matter more than we think. And if this story's already tugging at something inside you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We've got a long road ahead. Funny how fast a habit can turn into a highlight. After that day, I started noticing Alonzo more. Not in a romantic way, at least, that's what I kept telling myself. It was just, something about him felt easy. Safe. Like slipping into a warm bath after a long day of pretending you're fine. He never forced conversation, but he always knew when to speak. One morning, he picked me up to take me to the co-op where I volunteer on Wednesdays. I slid into the back seat, closed the door, and sighed, more out of routine than emotion. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, not pressing, just present. Long morning already? I chuckled. Long decade. He smiled but didn't laugh. He just nodded. You carry it well. Carry what? I asked. Everything. That hit harder than I expected. Brian never said things like that. Not because he was cruel, he just wasn't tuned in that way. For Brian, love looked like bank transfers, scheduled oil changes, and calling the plumber without me having to ask twice. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. But hearing someone notice the weight I'd been carrying, it cracked something in me. A few days later, I caught myself lingering by the window a little longer, just to watch Alonzo pull up. I'd pretend I was checking the weather or pruning the plant near the sill, but really, I was just watching him arrive. And every time he opened that door, he greeted me with the same warm steadiness. Good morning, Adeline. Like the world hadn't forgotten me. Like I hadn't disappeared somewhere between marriage and motherhood and menopause. There was this one Thursday. Brian was supposed to join me at Nina Lozano's gallery opening. We RSVP'd weeks ago. I bought a soft plum dress, nothing fancy, but something that made me feel like myself again. An hour before we were supposed to leave, he walked into the kitchen. Babe, something came up. Can you go without me? That's all he said. Didn't even make eye contact. I nodded. Quietly. Smile even. And then I went upstairs, changed into that plum dress, and called Alonzo. He showed up like always. Polished. Calm. When I stepped out the front door, his eyes lingered just a second longer than usual. Wow, he said under his breath. Not loud. Not inappropriate. Just honest. The drive to the gallery was quiet, but not heavy. We had that kind of silence that holds space, not tension. When we arrived, I sat there for a moment before getting out. Thank you for this, I said. For what? For showing up. He didn't respond right away. Just gave me a soft smile. You don't have to thank me for doing what's right. Inside the gallery, people smiled and chatted about brushstrokes and wine pairings. But I felt like I was floating. My eyes scanned the room, but my thoughts were still in the car. I stayed an hour, made polite conversation with Jessica Crawford and Tiana Banks, and then slipped out early. Alonzo was still there. Waiting. Quiet. Reading a book by the glow of the dashboard light. I don't know why that image stayed with me. Maybe because Brian never waited for me like that. He always said, text me when you're done. But Alonzo just waited. When I opened the door, he looked up and smiled. Home? I nodded. And that night, on the ride back, we didn't talk. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. The next morning, I found a folded napkin tucked into the side pocket of my handbag. It was from the gallery's wine table. On it, in careful penmanship, was written. You looked like art last night. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it again, slipped it between the pages of my journal, and told myself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Have you ever had someone say something small, but it lit up your whole day? Share it below. I read every comment, and maybe someone else needs to hear what meant so much to you. A few days passed before I saw him again. Not by design, life just moved in that strange, slow rhythm where everything feels paused, even though the calendar keeps flipping. Brian had flown out to Phoenix for what he called a quick turnaround meeting. I didn't even ask what it was for. The truth is, I stopped keeping track of his schedule around the same time I stopped expecting him to ask about mine. He left before sunrise with his suitcase rolling down the hallway like an afterthought. He kissed my cheek and said, "Don't forget to pay the landscaper." Then the door closed, and the quiet took over. Later that morning, I had a board meeting at the museum downtown. I sat at the end of the table like I always do, present but invisible. I nodded at all the right moments, smiled when someone cracked a tired joke, but my mind was miles away. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding everything in until I stepped outside and saw Alonzo standing beside the car. It wasn't anything special, just him in his usual charcoal coat, one hand in his pocket, the other resting gently on the roof of the car, but I swear, I exhaled for the first time all day. "Rough meeting?" he asked as he opened the door. I didn't answer. I just slid in, dropped my bag beside me, and let the silence do the talking. We were halfway through the drive when he reached over, without a word, and turned on the seat warmer. Just a small act. Thoughtful. Quiet. Humans. "You looked tired," he said softly. I glanced at him. "I feel invisible." He didn't flinch. Didn't try to fix it. Instead, he said, "That's a heavy kind of tired." That night, I sat in the bath longer than usual. The water had long gone lukewarm, but I couldn't bring myself to get out. I just stared at the ceiling, counting the tiny cracks near the light fixture, wondering how long they'd been there, and how I never noticed. It's strange what you start to see when someone really sees you. The next week, I ran into Edie Salazar at the community center. She asked how Brian was doing and if we were still planning that anniversary cruise. I just smiled and said, "We're figuring it out." That was the safest answer. And the truest one I could give. Friday came with cold wind and gray skies. I'd told Alonzo I needed a ride to the florist, but deep down, I just wanted an excuse to see him again. I didn't need roses or tulips or anything at all, I just needed a moment where I didn't feel like I was folding myself into something smaller just to fit into someone else's life. He pulled up like always. Prompt. Still. His presence felt less like an arrival and more like a return. As I stepped into the car, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the engine and the soft tapping of rain on the roof. Minutes passed before he said anything. "I hope I didn't cross a line the other night." His voice was low. Not defensive, just careful. I looked over, and our eyes met in the rearview mirror. "You didn't." He nodded once. That was all. No drawn-out explanation. No uncomfortable apology. And maybe that's what made it feel so honest. At the florist, I wandered longer than I meant to. My fingers traced the edges of eucalyptus leaves and soft hydrangea petals. I picked out a single white lily, then changed my mind. I wasn't looking for flowers. I was looking for something that made sense. On the way back, something shifted. When he opened my door, his fingers brushed against my wrist, just for a second. But it lingered. Not in a forward way. Just enough for both of us to notice. I looked at him. Really looked. "Do you have family in town?" I asked. He nodded. "My sister. She teaches middle school out in Clearwater. My mom's nearby too, Largo." He smiled, but his eyes were distant. "Close enough to visit," he added. "But far enough to come up with reasons not to." That made me laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep in your chest, from a place that's been locked up for a while. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't reach for the door right away. "Do you ever wonder," I asked quietly, "how your life might have turned out if just one moment had gone differently?" He turned off the ignition, but didn't move. His voice came after a long pause. "I used to. A lot. Then I stopped noticing." Those words hung in the air long after he drove away. Later that night, I stood by the window with the lights off, watching the wind rustle the trees in the backyard. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to feel the quiet without it swallowing me. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Has someone ever made you feel seen when you needed it the most, but never asked for anything in return? If you've had a moment like that, even just once, tell me in the comments. Let's remind each other those moments are real. The days leading up to Thanksgiving always carried a certain weight. It wasn't about the turkey or the decorations or the guest list. Not for me, at least. It was the quiet pressure of pretending everything was whole, even when it wasn't. Brian had a tradition of bailing on holidays with a casual shrug. "The firm needs me," he'd say, like the firm was some fragile thing that would crumble if he dared take a day off. I used to argue. Then I started asking. And then I just stopped bringing it up altogether. That Tuesday, 3 days before Thanksgiving, he called while I was trying to pick out wine at the market. "I'll be flying out in the morning," he said. "DC this time. Should be back by Friday night." He didn't ask if I minded. He never did. That night, I had a charity dinner to attend. Something organized by Natalia Velasquez and Martin Wilkins, 2 names I barely knew but couldn't say no to. It was cold, the kind that crawls up your sleeves and settles in your bones, and I was already regretting my choice of heels. Alonzo was waiting, engine running, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't say much as I got in, just handed me a small travel mug. "Chamomile and ginger," he said. "You looked like you needed something warm." I didn't even ask how he knew that. I just wrapped my hands around the cup and whispered, "Thank you." The car smelled faintly of cedar and leather and something else I couldn't name, maybe safety. Or maybe I was just starting to associate his presence with calm. Dinner was predictable. Oversalted canapes, champagne that tastes like coins, and conversations so thin you could fold them into paper cranes. Everyone kept asking about Brian. "Is he in town? Did he get stuck in traffic? Tell him we missed him." I smiled. Nodded. Laughed politely. And when it was finally over, I escaped to the coat check like a woman on the run. The car was waiting just outside the glass doors. The drizzle had turned into a soft mist, kissing the windshield like the world was whispering secrets. I slid into the back seat, kicked off my heels, and exhaled hard. Alonzo glanced at me in the mirror. "You okay?" I hesitated. Then shrugged. "He's skipping Thanksgiving," I said quietly. "Says he'll be back in time for dessert." Alonzo didn't flinch. Didn't say something shallow like "that's too bad" or "I'm sure he means well." Instead, he said, "Holidays should be about being present." That word again, present. It didn't shout. It didn't sting. But it landed like the truth. As we pulled into the driveway, the porch light was glowing soft behind the mist. I didn't move to open the door. I just sat there for a moment, soaking in the warmth of the seat, the stillness between us. He turned slightly, resting one arm over the passenger seat. "Are you okay, Adeline?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know," I said. "I really don't know." And then the quiet wrapped around us like a blanket. No radio. No engine. Just the soft tick of the dashboard and the hush of rain. He reached over, not quickly, not boldly, just gently, and placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm. Steady. And my whole body went still. There was no kiss. No sudden music swelling in the background. Just that hand. That moment. And it changed everything. When I finally stepped out of the car, my feet hit the pavement with a new kind of awareness. Like something in me had shifted, and I didn't yet know what to do with it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from guilt, not exactly. Not even fear. It was like my soul had been nudged awake after sleeping too long in a room with no windows. I kept hearing his voice in my head. "You looked like you needed something warm. Holidays should be about being present. Are you okay?" 3 questions I hadn't been asked in years. The next morning, Brian didn't call. Not that I expected him to. I went through the motions, brushed my hair, fed the cat, cleaned the guest bathroom just in case someone dropped by. But my mind wasn't in any of it. It was still in that car. At that moment. In that simple touch that felt more like a full conversation than anything Brian had said to me in months. The sky outside stayed heavy and low, like it was holding something back. And maybe I was, too. I made soup I didn't eat, lit candles I didn't need, and stared at the folded napkin tucked inside my journal. The one with 7 words that still made my hands tremble. You looked like art last night. Ever had one of those moments that didn't look like anything to the world, but meant everything to you? If you know what I mean, share it. I promise someone else here will understand too. Thanksgiving came and went like fog on a windshield, there, and then gone. Brian flew in late that morning, a golf bag slung over his shoulder like some kind of emotional armor. He walked in, kissed my cheek like we were coworkers, not husband and wife, and asked what time dinner was. No apology. No warmth. Just routine, like a man who'd shown up to clock in. We had a few friends over. Margot McCoy, Kelly Macias, and Boone Wood brought dessert. The neighbors dropped by with wine and small talk. Everyone smiled like we were all part of some well-rehearsed play. Brian poured bourbon, made jokes that felt worn at the edges, and fell asleep on the couch before halftime of the football game. And me? I floated through it. Setting the table. Reheating dishes. Laughing on cue. Pretending that a cold silence isn't silence at all when it's filled with enough clinking glasses and casserole dishes. But deep down, I felt like I was watching my own life from outside the window. Like I didn't belong to any of it anymore. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing the pie plates and wondering how many years I'd done the exact same thing. How many holidays I'd spent carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, hoping for some kind of gratitude that never came. I dried my hands. Reached for my phone. And called Alonzo. I don't need a ride, I said quickly. I wondered if you were free for coffee. There was a pause on the line. Not long. Just enough for my heart to skip once. I am, he said. We met at this little cafe off Maplewood. The kind with mismatched chairs and windows that steamed from the inside. When I walked in, he was already there, book in one hand, coffee in the other. There was something calming about it. Like nothing needed to be explained. I didn't know if you'd come, he said as I slid into the chair across from him. Neither did I admitted. We didn't start with pleasantries. Not even a proper how are you. We just sat. And something about that silence felt more honest than anything I'd said to Brian in years. Eventually, we talked. Not about the weather or work or errands. But about music. About loss. About the weird, quiet ways life rearranges itself when you aren't looking. He didn't interrupt. Didn't try to solve anything. He just listened. I had spent years, decades, maybe, tending to everyone else's needs. Brian. The kids. My friends. The damn dinner table. And somewhere along the way, I'd misplaced the sound of my own thoughts. I forgot what it meant to feel alive. When we stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The pavement still shimmered from the morning drizzle. The air smelled like wet leaves and something else I couldn't quite place. Possibly, maybe. Alonzo walked me to my car. Neither of us said much. Thank you, I finally said. For listening. For not rushing this. His eyes met mine. Steady. Kind. Some things shouldn't be rushed, he said. Especially when they matter. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't blast music or call a friend or try to make sense of any of it. I just sat there for a while with my hands in my lap, the warmth from his words still clinging to my skin like sunlight on a cold day. Something was changing. Not in a dramatic, scandalous way. But in a quiet corner of my heart that had gone silent years ago. And now it was whispering again. Back at home, Brian was in the study, reading reports from a company he'd already retired from. He looked up briefly when I walked in. How was your day? Good, I said. And it was. Not because of anything grand. But because, for once, I felt like I'd spent the day living instead of just performing. And Brian? He nodded and went back to his papers. Like nothing had shifted. But I had. Ever had one of those conversations that didn't change the world, but changed how you saw yourself? Drop it in the comments. You never know who else needs to hear it. It's funny how silence changes shape when something inside you shifts. The silence in our home used to feel like absence, like standing in an empty room and waiting for someone to walk in. But now, it felt more like space. Room to breathe. Room to think. And that scared me a little, if I'm being honest. Brian and I moved around each other like we were pieces of old furniture, functional, worn in, comfortable, and completely untouched. He still left early for the club, still asked if I'd seen his cufflinks, still brought home dry cleaning and red wine like those things meant we were okay. But we weren't okay. We were just quiet. And I'd finally stopped confusing that with peace. That Saturday, I took a long walk along the trail behind our house. It used to be my favorite place before the years started stacking up, before my knees stiffened and my spirit got quiet. The air was cold, sharp even. I pulled my scarf higher and stuffed my hands into my coat pockets. The trees were bare, but not ugly. Just honest. Nothing left to hide. I envied them a little for that. When I reached the bench near the creek, the one Brian had installed for me a decade ago and never once sat on, I brushed off the frost and sat down. The seat was cold, but it grounded me. Like it had been waiting for me all along. My phone buzzed. A message from Alonzo. Hope the cold's been kind to you today. I drove past the lake and thought of you. Feels like a quiet kind of day. It wasn't romantic. Not overtly. But it reached straight into that soft part of me, the part that still believed in connection without performance. I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I just stared at the words. Wondering how something so simple could feel so important. That evening, Brian came home with a bottle of wine tucked under his arm and this awkward smile on his face. We've been invited to the Donnellys' Christmas party, he said, like it was news I should be excited about. I hadn't seen the Donnellys in over a year. And they hadn't noticed. Should be nice, he added. Might be good for you to get out more. I raised an eyebrow. You say that like I've been hiding under the porch. He looked confused, almost wounded, like he'd walked into a joke he didn't understand. I just meant, you've seemed a little distant lately. Distant. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him where he'd been when I couldn't sleep for weeks. Where he was when our son lost his job and I sat on the bathroom floor crying so quietly even the cat didn't hear me. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded. Sure. Let's go. The party was exactly what I expected. Shrimp cocktails, beige conversations, and people telling the same stories they told last year but with different names dropped in for flavor. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. Sipped my wine. Answered the how are you, with practiced grace. And then, through the frost-glazed window, I saw him. Alonzo. Standing by a black car at the curb. He was wearing a navy wool coat, his hands tucked into his pockets, his face turned slightly toward the stars like he was waiting for the sky to speak. He hadn't told me he'd be working the event. Or maybe he didn't know I'd be there. Either way, it caught me off guard. Our eyes met through the window. Just a second. Just enough. He dipped his head in a quiet hello. I excused myself, murmured something about needing to take a call, and slipped out into the night. The air hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding. He turned as I approached. His breath curled into the air between us. Cold evening, I said. He smiled. It's the kind of cold that wakes you up. We stood there for a moment. Nothing urgent. Just stillness. A hush between us that said more than anything we could have put into words. You look beautiful tonight, he said. I blushed. Not because it was new, but because it never felt like flattery with him. It always felt like the truth. You always say that. That's because it's always true. I looked down at my heels, suddenly aware of how ridiculous they felt on cold pavement and gravel. This all feels like a dream sometimes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough to share the air. Then I hope it's the kind you don't want to wake up from. The words didn't startle me. They didn't shake the ground beneath me. They just fit. Perfectly. And then a door opened behind us and voices spilled out like noise breaking a spell. I stepped back, adjusting my coat. I should get back, I said. He nodded, but his eyes held on to mine. I know. Inside, Brian was deep in conversation with someone about interest rates and property taxes, things that didn't feel real anymore, not at that moment. He didn't ask where I'd gone. Didn't even notice I'd stepped outside. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, washing off the version of me I'd painted on for the evening. Lipstick. Blush. Mascara. Gone. And when I looked back up at my reflection, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. A flicker of light in my eyes. Not love. Not guilt. Just something alive. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and seen someone coming back to life, someone you thought you'd lost? If you know that feeling, or you're still searching for it, tell me in the comments. Let's remind each other that rediscovery is possible. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached for my journal. It was buried in the back of the nightstand drawer, behind an old pair of reading glasses and a birthday card from one of the grandkids. The leather cover was worn at the corners, soft like a well-used coat. I sat at the edge of the bed with the morning light spilling through the curtains and just stared at the blank page. Then, without really meaning to, I started writing. Dear Brian. I don't know if this is a goodbye or a beginning. Maybe both. I want you to know, I never stopped trying. But I stopped feeling. You didn't lose me to a man. You lost me to the woman I used to be. The one I buried under polite dinners, dry towels, and casseroles. The one who stopped asking for anything because silence felt easier than rejection. I don't blame you. I just can't keep pretending. I miss the girl I used to be. And I think I finally found her again, in the quiet. In someone who listened. In a car that never asked me to shrink to fit inside it. I don't hate you. I'm not angry. I'm just done performing. Adeline. I didn't tear the letter out. I didn't even date it. I just closed the journal and slid it back into the drawer. It wasn't meant for him, not really. It was meant for me. And that was enough. The next few days passed slowly, like the air had thickened and the clocks decided to take their time. I started painting again. Just little things, flowers from memory, the curve of a window I saw once in Italy, a teacup with a chip in the rim that somehow made it feel more real. I sat outside more often, wrapped in a blanket, watching the wind move through the bare branches like it was brushing secrets into the sky. And Alonzo? He didn't text. He didn't call. Maybe he was giving me space. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Or maybe he was waiting to see if I'd come to him, not as a passenger, but as a woman with her eyes finally open. I thought about him more than I meant to. But not in the way people think. It wasn't infatuation. It wasn't a scandal. It was stillness. Peace. The kind you don't know you're starving for until someone brings it to your doorstep without asking why you're hungry in the first place. Christmas came with a chill that settled in my bones, but not in my heart. Brian handed me a small box, square and heavy. Inside was a watch, expensive, elegant, and cold. I thanked him. He nodded. Then turned on the news. That afternoon, I stepped into the garden. Everything was brown and brittle. The lavender had long given up, and even the rosemary had started to fade. But the air was full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Potential. Possibility. I picked up my phone. Took a breath. And called Alonzo. He answered on the second ring. I was just thinking about you, he said. I smiled. We didn't make plans. We didn't need to. Some connections don't need appointments, they just need space to breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't restless. It was an awakening. The kind of stirring that doesn't come with fireworks or music swelling in the background. Just a quiet knowing that something inside you has finally stood up. Not to leave, but to live. Have you ever written something down, not to send, not to show anyone, but just to hear yourself think again? If you have, share a line below. Maybe your truth will help someone else find theirs. The days between Christmas and New Year's always feel suspended in time. There's this strange stillness that lingers, like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. People make plans and promises. They buy new calendars and try to write over old memories like they're pages that can be erased. But I wasn't interested in starting over. I just wanted to start again, with myself. It was a Tuesday. Brian had gone to the club. Something about a planning meeting for next quarter. As if retirement had quarters. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the dishwasher humming low in the background. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, pulled my coat tight, and grabbed my keys without telling anyone where I was going. I didn't need permission anymore. I drove to the same cafe where I'd met Alonzo just a few weeks earlier. It was nearly empty. The usual crowd had trickled away, replaced by a few regulars and a sleepy barista wiping down counters. I didn't look around for him. Because I wasn't here for him. I was here for me. I ordered a black coffee with a dash of cream and an almond croissant. Sat by the window. Watched the wind stir dried leaves along the sidewalk. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. There was no sadness. No ache. Just stillness. I opened my journal. Not to write a letter. Not to untangle my feelings. Just to be with them. And somewhere between the first sip and the final bite of pastry, I realized something. Freedom doesn't always come in the form of leaving. Sometimes, it looks like staying, just not as the same person. It's reclaiming the quiet. It's sitting alone at a table for one and not apologizing for the joy it brings. Alonzo didn't walk on that day. And I didn't need him to. I wasn't chasing a new story. I was finally honoring my own. When I got back home, Brian was in the kitchen, swirling red wine in a glass like it had something profound to say. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good," I said. And it was. Not because of what happened. But because I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. And that might be the purest kind of peace I've ever known. Later that night, I stood on the porch, watching the sky fade into that soft, lavender blue that only winter can pull off. I wrapped the scarf tighter around my neck, closed my eyes, and breathed in the stillness. No plans. No resolutions. Just presence. I didn't leave Brian for Alonzo. I didn't fall in love with someone else. I fell back into myself. Into the version of me I thought was gone. The one who laughs for no reason. The one who paints late at night. The one who isn't afraid of being alone. Because she finally likes the person keeping her company. Have you ever sat at a table for one and felt something shift inside you? A moment where you stopped surviving and started living again? Tell your story in the comments. There's someone watching this right now who needs to know they're not alone. And if this story made you feel seen, click like, share it with someone quietly struggling, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the parts of us we forget to honor. This isn't just a channel. It's a space where rediscovery is sacred. And your story belongs here too.